Welcome to one of the most thrilling topics for Christianity, ecumenical movement. Ecumenical movement was born from the human desire to repair the cleavages of Christianity. During the prayer uttered in Gethsemane, Jesus Christ prayed that all may be one. The members of his body, for at least some decades after his death, did not saw in Christ the founder of a new religion, but the prophet and the Messiah that explained to them God's everlasting covenant and would fulfill the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. As the church evolved, people from pagan religions converted to Christ. They changed their religion. In this new milieu, Christianity built in time its theology, its tradition, and its vision or visions. But something had occurred, quickly or not, but something has occurred, and different understandings over some topics, some biblical, some philosophical, generated great schisms inside the Christianity. Well known for Romanian people, but not the only ones, are the Great Schism from 1054 or 1204 and the Reformation. Now, three Christian traditions in Romania, Eastern Orthodox, Western Catholic, and Protestant, which are also Western, have engaged in a movement to heal the wounds of Christianity. This is the topic about I invited Professor Hovorun to talk about. Welcome, Professor Hovorun, at this meeting.
Thank you, Paul. Good to see you again. And I hope we will have a fruitful discussion today, helpful to your audience, to those who subscribe to your channel.
I hope also. The title of this discussion will be The Church, the Churches, and ecumenism, and I will explain the title.
Right.
The church is the church, the only church that Christ redeemed by his blood. There is only one. There are not 2, 3, 4, and so on. The churches are those institutions about we say that are the church. Orthodox believe that Christ founded Orthodoxy, Catholic believe that Christ founded Romano-Catholicism, and Protestants, Protestantism. And ecumenism, the third word in the title, is our desire to see how the church, the only church, will emerge from these churches. In the end, finally, ultimately. Please describe the first attempts to unite the divided church, the instruments used then, and the unifying factors that were believed to be able to create the unity. Persons, the name of a religion, for example, creeds, and so on. So the first attempts in history to repair the division in the church.
Right. Well, thank you for your questions. Indeed, we as Christians firmly believe that the church is one. This belief is proclaimed in the Creed, Nicene Creed, that I believe in one church. And it goes back to the words of Christ, who prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, Father, make them one, make my disciple one, so that they be one. Unity seems to be a categorical imperative for Christianity. It's something which is embedded deeply into the nation, to the nature of the church. It's I call it the essere of the church. It's not ben essere of the church. It's not just, optional. It's good to be one. It's that we need to be one. Well, Christians need to be one. And I distinguish between the church which is undivided, which is one, remains one, and Christians who are divided. Christians are divided, but the church is not. And the purpose of ecumenism is to bring all Christians to unity. And those efforts, those attempts, go back as early as to the apostolic era. We could recall the actual argument, not just a discussion, but a rather fierce argument between Peter and Paul about where to go for the Christian community, to spill out to the pagan world or to stay within the confines of the Jewish community of Palestine. And the Christian, it was not just Paul and Peter who were arguing one another. It was a community which was divided over this issue, whether to allow to open the doors to the pagans to convert to Christianity by passing the stage of Judaism, or to keep Christianity confined to the Jewish community, to the chosen people. And as we know, well, where the church chose to be really universal and ecumenical and be present everywhere, to engulf different cultures and languages, not just to stay within Judaism, but the Christian community was divided then at the time. For this reason, for example, in order to heal the division, they had to gather a council. We know about this council. Well, it was not called a council; it was like a gathering in Jerusalem in sometime in mid first century. But we know that that gathering, which was not yet called council, synodos, but the synods, the councils in the centuries that followed, just followed the example of this gathering of Jerusalem. So this synod, this council, was called to overcome the division. Well, to decide where to go for the Christian church, how to develop further, and how to heal the division, a schism, well, kind of proto-schism that already occurred within the Christian community at the time. Then the divisions within Christianity occurred again and again. There were many of them, and we know about like major movements, like for example Donatists in Northern Africa, one of the earliest schisms. Then Meletians, also in the Greek-speaking Africa, Northern Africa. Donatists were in the Latin-speaking. Then the divisions caused by the persecutions and by the fact that many Christians betrayed Christianity in the period of persecutions. We know about the martyrs who heroically confessed Christ and died for confessing Christ in the early Christian centuries, but we don't know very much about those who actually participated in the sacrifices, who became what the early Christians called lapsi, the fallen ones. Actually, well, the scholars, the historians estimate that there were much more fallen Christians than the martyrs. And the church had to deal with those fallen, and the church became divided over those fallen Christians, and that became the reason of the first Christian schisms. Then the Arian crisis came again in Egypt, in northern Africa, in Greek-speaking Africa, which divided the church so profoundly that it became really shambles, became fragmented during the 4th century. And only huge efforts from the church and from the imperial authorities preserved the unity of the church in the 4th century. Nevertheless, despite these efforts, the huge schism did occur. You mentioned the Great Schism in the 11th century, but it was not the first Great Schism. The first Great Schism occurred actually in the 5th century in the east of the Roman Empire, and it evolved around two councils, the Council of Ephesus in 531 and the Council of Chalcedon, in 431, and the Council of Chalcedon in 451. Those Christological controversies that happened in the 5th century provoked a profound division within the Christian community that continues to our day. It was the Eastern Christianity at the time that became divided to the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian, Ephesian and non-Ephesian parts. And this was really nowadays those churches that separated at the time. Nowadays they are small, but at that time they constituted almost like half of the Christian churches globally existent at that time. So
including West.
including West, including the West.
Including
And
West,
the
wow.
Western Church at the time was really a smaller part of Christianity. The majority of Christians lived exactly in Syria, in Egypt, in those areas that were affected by the Great Schism. I call it the Great Schism number one, which continues to our days. Then the second Great Schism occurred, this time between East and West, between the former allies. In the 5th century, the churches of Rome and Constantinople, the two capitals of the Roman Empire, they were allies in supporting the Council of Chalcedon, but in the 11th century, they became separated, divided, and found themselves on the opposite sides of the divide, of the Christian divide. And the second Great Schism occurred between Eastern and Western Christianity. And finally, and as we know, that schism continues to our days as a schism between the Catholics and the Orthodox. And the final and the third Great Schism, I call it the third Great Schism, occurred in the period of Reformation. As the first Great Schism happened mostly in the eastern part of Christianity, the third Great Schism happened in the western part of Christianity, when the Western Church became divided, just as the Eastern Church had been divided approximately 1,000 years before that. And that schism between Protestants and the Catholics continues to our days as well. So we see that Christianity always faced divisions. Divisions always existed within one church. Christians were divided. Sometimes some divisions were successfully overcome. Some were never overcome. The great schisms still exist to our days. They've never been overcome, unfortunately, and they continue to separate Christians from one another. And the global ecumenical movement, yes, well, it is believed to have started in the beginning of the 20th century with the famous Edinburgh Conference in 1910, where the Christian missionaries, Protestant missionaries mostly, came together in order to discuss how, instead of competing one another especially in the empires, in our overseas territories, that the empires like British Empire, the Dutch, and the French and others developed their missions overseas. Instead of competing in those overseas territories, they should work together. And that's the first ecumenical momentum in the West, how it emerged. But we often ignore, and especially in the East, we ignore that the first ecumenical attempts started in the Christian East, long before modern era. As soon as the first Christian divisions happened, the first attempts to overcome those divisions happened as well. So I mentioned the Council of Jerusalem in the mid-1st century, which was the first ecumenical attempt, meaning the attempt of ecumenism, the attempt to overcome the divisions, the emerging divisions within the Christian community. And it was successful. Then, for example, the council, a very important and yet neglected Council of Arles in 314 happened, which was a forerunner to the Council of Nicaea. It set an example for the Council of Nicaea. It was gathered by Emperor Constantine when he was a ruler in the West, and who tried to heal the Donatist schism. That was another ecumenical council, the first one, actually the first imperial council in the Christian history in 314. Then the Council of Nicaea 325, which was also ecumenical in the sense that it tried to heal the schism that occurred in the Greek-speaking part of Africa, Northern Africa. Then as the Eastern schisms evolved, the first great schism occurred following the Council of Chalcedon. Then there were councils that tried to overcome those schisms. For example, the Fifth Ecumenical Council in 551 in Constantinople, we in the East and the Western Church also accepts this as the Fifth Ecumenical Council. It was designed specifically to overcome the schism. It was ecumenical in the double sense of the word, ecumenical in the sense that it was pan-imperial. All the churches across the empire and beyond participated in it, but it also ecumenical in the sense of fostering churches' unity, Christian unity. And after that, it was again and again repeated that the church applied efforts in cooperation with the state. By the way, it should be said that the role of the empire was crucial in the first ecumenical efforts, especially during the first millennium. And the Eastern Roman Empire, with the capital of Constantinople, played a protagonistic role in healing divisions, in overcoming schisms. We don't call it ecumenism, but it was de facto ecumenism at the time of the first millennium. So I would argue that ecumenism was born in the Christian East, and ecumenism was really important in the Christian East. And it is very pity, and it's a shame that in the Christian East we so much neglect ecumenism, and we accuse ecumenism of being, some people say it's like an arch heresy, is like a super heresy. This is so anachronistic. It's so ignoring, the history of Eastern Christianity, where ecumenism was born and flourished, especially in the first millennium. So I would argue that there were always church divisions, unfortunately, in the churches. As long as the church existed, there were divisions among the Christians. And as long as there were divisions among the Christians, there were ecumenical attempts by the churches. And primarily, they occurred in the first millennium in the East. The Eastern Church, Orthodox Church, was the pioneer, the protagonist of ecumenism in the first millennium. Then in the second millennium, the Western Church became the protagonist of ecumenical efforts, primarily with the Catholic Church playing a leading role, hence all those projects of uniatism. I believe they were unsuccessful projects. They were wrong projects, but they were at least motivated by sincere desire of restoring unity. And the Catholic Church proceeded to many councils, including, like, for example, the famous Lyon and Ferrara-Florence Council, and then Brest Council, that established different uniate churches. Those councils failed to restore the complete unity, but at least they demonstrated the intent of the Catholic Church to bring up some unity. And then, of course, after the Reformation and the further fragmentation of the Western Church, ecumenical efforts doubled, and they really flourished in the 20th century. The 20th century has become the era of ecumenism. I should say also one more thing about confessionalism. So the third great schism, as I call it, following the Reformation, provoked a new situation, a situation when different Christian groups began identifying themselves with confessions. It had to do with the Protestant confessions, like Augsburg Confession and others, that a particular group of Christians identified themselves with a particular confession and became known by the founder of this group or by the confession. Hence are Lutherans, for example, or Calvinists, or Reformed, various Baptist groups, Pentecostal, so forth. So that's the situation of confessionalism, which also affected the traditional kind of confessions. Following the Reformation, in the wake of the Catholic Reformation, the Council of Trent, in the 16th century, the Catholic Church adopted this mentality of confessionalism and embraced a sort of confession as differentiating the Catholic Church from other Protestant churches. And the Orthodox, we also had our own confessions. Like, for example, by the way, Iași, Romanian Iași played an important role in forming the Eastern Christian Orthodox confessionalism. The Council of Iași in the 17th century adopted one of the earliest confessional texts for Eastern Christianity. Later on, it was elaborated upon and adopted in the Council of Kiev, with a leading role played by Petro Mohila or Petro Movila, a Moldavian metropolitan who became important in Ukraine, became a metropolitan of Kiev and became saint eventually, but he had Romanian origins, Moldavian origin, and he played a key role in composing this confession of Petro Mohila or Petro Movila, and he played this key role in forming, shaping the Orthodox confessionalism. And I believe confessionalism became really a plug for the Christian unity, became really a disease, because it deepened the divisions, made them profound and almost unsurmountable. Now it's very difficult to deal with confessionalism. I mean, in the framework of the ecumenical movement. Yes, the ecumenical movement flourished and continues flourishing It flourished in the 20th century, continues flourishing in our time, but it faces a lot of issues, primarily confessionalism of different Christian groups. So that's one of the challenges. That is a summary of kind of an overview of development of ecumenism. I wanted to stress that ecumenism is not a new thing. It's very old. It's tradition. It's apostolic. It's traditional for the Eastern Christianity, even though Eastern Christianity rebukes it, rejects it, and it's still important for all the churches nowadays.
Regarding what you just have said, just some short questions, probably short answers. You made a link between the ecumenism of the 4th, 5th, 6th century and modern ecumenism. Just you see this link, or in the ecumenical movement, everybody sees this link and consider that ecumenical movement from today is the same thing as the ecumenical attempts from the ancient times, for example, in the 4th, 5th.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the Byzantine history is not a part of the ecumenical studies yet. Those who study Byzantium, they understand, they know about those ecumenical attempts, but they don't usually study ecumenical studies. And those who do ecumenical studies, they usually don't study Byzantium because they believe it's irrelevant. Well, the Orthodox contribute to this perception, wrong perception, because we believe ecumenism is very anti-Orthodox, while it is very much Orthodox. So it's like a new idea which is emerging, which is being discussed, and well, I'd like to share with you about this idea, and it's a kind of a new direction in the ecumenical studies which is emerging, and I hope it is very promising for the future.
The unifying factors in the past, I asked you in the beginning about this, and I said, which were the unifying factors? A creed, a person, a bishop, for example. You didn't say anything about this. I remember you. So which were the unifying factors, and if that unifying factors are functioning today? Because you mentioned that in the first millennium, Orthodox Church was involved in ecumenism, but in the second, Catholic took that lead.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. First of all, I believe the most important unifying factor is all those words of Christ, who prayed to his Father so that all be one. This category imperative of Christianity, that Christians should be one. They should not be divided. Then this idea became more kind of theologically articulated in the Creed of Nicaea, with the statement that we believe in one church. And since then, the creeds became like platforms for the Christian unity. Christian community became fragmented, and the creeds tried to pull them together. It was not always successful. Even the Nicene Creed, initially in the first decades following the Council of Nicaea, was a dividing factor for the church. The church became divided over Nicaea, and only later on, in the end of the 4th century, the Nicene Creed was kind of reconsidered, reused as a factor of unification for the entire church. And since then, it has become a factor of unity, church unity. Even now, for example, if a church wants to become a member of the World Council of Churches, that church must accept the Council of Nicaea as a kind of criterion of participation in the global ecumenical movement. So the Council of Nicaea now is a factor of unity, in contrast to the 4th century, when it was a factor of disunity of the church. What was more important, even more important than even the creed in the 4th century, was the imperial power. Well, we can be critical of the political, the imperial involvement in the matters of the church. I am critical myself very much about that, but one should acknowledge that without the empire, the church would have been probably divided much earlier than it became divided. The emperors usually were interested more than even the hierarchs of the church of preserving the unity. Sometimes they forced the church to come to compromises, and sometimes those compromises were unacceptable for the church. But the emperors always tried to bring the church together, because that was for them a condition to secure the unity, the integrity of their state, the unity of the church. So during the first millennium, I would argue, the imperial authority became crucial, fundamental in preserving the church's unity. Therefore, the churches that were outside the Roman Empire became kind of separated. We are talking about the Church of the East first, the Church in the Persian Empire, the so-called Nestorian Church, and then the different Oriental churches that found themselves under the Muslim rule, and they became really distant from other churches. In the West, papacy, with the emergence, with the role of papacy, really crucial role of papacy, especially after the Gregorian reforms in the 11th century, played this important role, because popes were essentially political leaders, as we know, and they secured the unity of the Catholic Church at least. It was not optimal, as we know. There were many mistakes made by the popes, which eventually triggered the Reformation, and we know that the Reformation had very good reasons. It reacted to the abuses of the papal authority, papal power, also in the attempts of the popes to preserve the church's unity. So the popes did not work well in preserving the unity, even though they tried. It should be acknowledged they honestly tried. Different political authorities, in other words, centers of gravity, political gravity, contributed and played a crucial role in preserving church unity during the first and second millennia. In the first millennium, it was the empire, the Roman Empire, and in the first half of the second millennium, until the Reformation at least, it was the Catholic Church. Nowadays, it's a very good question. What are the factors that contribute to keep the churches interested in the ecumenical movement? I think it is the ecumenical movement per se. Different organizations and groups like World Council of Churches, for example, with all its faults and mistakes, it has done a lot of mistakes. It still tries to keep the churches interested, to get closer to each other. Then it is the spirit of our time. The spirit of our time is the spirit of dialogue, of overcoming divisions, of bridging walls, borders, and destroying walls. And I think this spirit helps the ecumenical movement. It helps the churches to get closer to each other. And actually, we've done a lot of the churches, a lot of advances in coming closer to each other. The ecumenical movement, even though it has not reached its goal, restoration of unity, it has done a lot of work in bringing actually the churches closer to each other. And I think this spirit of dialogue, spirit of cooperation that is important in our time, helps it a lot. I honestly believe that even the European Union can play an important role in facilitating the dialogue between the churches. It's not the business of the European Union to interfere in the matters of the church. Of course, it's not the business of the European politicians to do so. But certainly, different platforms created within the European Union can help the churches to get closer to each other, at least in Europe.
You mentioned very often the state here. I had a question, but I will ask you that question now, because it's in the context of what you are saying just now. You spoke, and you are still speaking very well about the political orthodoxies. From your point of view, is there or would be a political ecumenism? I'm referring to the implication of the state or states in the process of ecumenism. What do you think about this?
Well, yes, it's a good question. Again, the states, as long as the ecumenical movement, institutionalized ecumenical movement, existed, the states tried to interfere and to use it. For example, the Soviet Union was notorious in abusing the ecumenical movement. When the Soviet authorities under Khrushchev allowed the Russian Orthodox Church, to enter the ecumenical movement, to join the ecumenical movement. It happened after the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches in New Delhi in 1961, when the churches from the Eastern Bloc joined, I think including the Romanian Church. The Romanian Church at the time as well joined the ecumenical movement. I mean, the Romanian Orthodox Church. The moment the churches joined the WCC, the states behind them started using those churches against the West, started instrumentalizing those platforms, ecumenical platforms, to serve their own interests. The official delegations sent, for example, from the Soviet Union, from Romania under Ceausescu, were supposed to, to influence the World Council of Churches, and to benefit the regimes in those states. I recently, a student of mine defended a thesis about Andres Crima, a Romanian theologian, Orthodox ecumenist, who was very famous in the time of Ceausescu. He was connected with the Romanian Church, of course, but he was against the regime, Ceausescu's regime, and the study demonstrates how regime surveyed his activities, how the regime was interested in in the ecumenical platforms and ecumenical activities, and it was interested to use ecumenism to its own benefit. Andres Crima, for example, did not cooperate with the Romanian state, with Securitate and other agencies, and Securitate had files, really a lot of documents on him, because they wanted to use him for the benefit of the regime, unsuccessfully. But it demonstrates how the state was interested, including in Romania, how the state was interested in using ecumenism to its own ends, even though formally the state was atheist. It had nothing to do with religion. And to our days, it continues. Like if you take Putin's regime in Russia, it still uses and abuses the ecumenical movement. The ecumenical movement, that's one of the problems of the World Council of Churches. It like plays the game of Putin, and quite often corroborates Russian propaganda, and cooperates, with the Russian Church also in doing evil things. So the ecumenism, which means that ecumenism is important. I mean, ecumenism, at least those regimes consider the ecumenical movement as powerful. And because it is powerful, it can be useful for those regimes. And they try to use and abuse those platforms and the ecumenical movement.
But in terms of cooperation, a state that cooperates with a religion to form something what was in the past, but in a positive sense, not what Putin is doing today, for example.
Well, certainly, if you take, for example, I think, again, Brussels, ecumenical, the European Union. And I know that in the recent years, European institutions, particularly the People's Party, the Popular Party, European Popular Party, which is more like a conservative one, tries to create a platform for various forms of rapprochement between Christian churches and communities across Europe. So there are some frameworks created within EU, for example, that facilitate dialogues. Another example is Ukraine. In Ukraine, as you probably know, Ukraine is very diverse religiously, and we have a lot of confessions and religious groups. The Orthodoxy is the largest one, but not as it's not the only one. It doesn't have monopoly. The Orthodox churches, they don't have monopoly in Ukraine. There is all Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, which is like an NGO, but it is facilitated by the state, which functions as a great platform for different churches and religious groups, including Muslim and Jewish groups, to talk to each other. Sometimes that's the only place where the churches talk to each other, and it is an example of very, very constructive cooperation between the state and the churches in helping at least churches and religious groups to talk to each other, not necessarily to become one church, but to talk to each other, which is already important.
Do you think that the ecumenical movement is the only possibility for unity of the churches, or maybe others, other ways, other, I don't know, fields?
Yeah. Well, I've become a bit skeptical about the institutionalized ecumenical bodies like the WCC. I believe it just doesn't go where it should go. Quite often, it has become too politicized and too instrumentalized by different political groups. And besides that, there are conversations in the global ecumenical community about the so-called ecumenical fatigue or ecumenical autumn, when churches get disinterested, get tired of ecumenical engagements, and sometimes the WCC people in the WCC feel they are just irrelevant, they are powerless, they can't do anything, they can't bring any change. It doesn't mean that the ecumenism has exhausted itself. It means that there are new forms, different forms that emerge of cooperation between the churches. There are some forms which are helpful and forms which are less helpful. The less helpful forms are ecumenism based on ideology, on common ideology, when the churches become grouped on the basis of the common, like, traditional values. Hence is a very strange alliance, for example, between some conservative evangelicals and Orthodox, especially in the United States, where they try to, they talk, they have a sort of cooperation on the basis of conservatism, ideological conservatism. I think this is a wrong kind of ecumenism. It doesn't bring us anywhere. It may help some churches to achieve their current political goals, but they don't help churches to achieve the ultimate goal of ecumenical movement, the restoration of church unity, because what they try to pursue is political, not ecclesial, not Christian goal.
Mhm.
At the same time, there are grassroots level initiatives, people in the communities who try to talk. Like, for example, in Ukraine, again, let me bring Ukraine, which I know well. We could speak about, like, intra-Orthodox dialogue and ecumenism there. As you know, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine is divided. There are two churches, the Autocephalous and the Moscow Patriarchate, and the people on the top of those churches don't talk to each other. They hate each other. But people on the ground, on the grassroots level, they prefer to talk to each other, and they develop some initiatives. We could say ecumenical initiatives on the lower layers of the church's existence, which are helpful and promising. I believe this is the future of ecumenism. After the established ecumenism is failing, the new wave of interest to ecumenism is getting up on the grassroots level.
Interesting. This point is very interesting. The main players on the ecumenical arena have serious cleavages inside their own church. Very serious. The small ones were not bypassed either by these problems. Should the churches try to heal their internal wounds before unity of all churches may be achieved, fulfilled? Or do you think it is possible to achieve unity in spite of the internal vulnerability, let's say? It's not only vulnerability, problems are much bigger than a small vulnerability.
Yeah, that's a very good, excellent question, and it hits exactly the core of the problems pertinent to ecumenism. There is an anti-ecumenical resistance in most churches. There are anti-ecumenical circles in the Catholic Church, particularly like in the Society of Pius X, or Opus Dei groups. There are groups opposing ecumenism within Protestantism, especially among the Pentecostals, as you know. There are, of course, anti-ecumenical groups in Orthodoxy, including the so-called old calendarists, and there are some in Romanian old calendarists. Also within the Romanian Orthodox Church, under the Patriarchate of Bucharest, there are many Romanians I know who are against ecumenism. They believe ecumenism is a kind of arch heresy, and of course, the further the leadership of the church proceeds in accepting ecumenism, the more is the resistance within the church to this movement of the hierarchy. And I think there should be a balance found between, the advances towards the ecumenical goals and preserving the integrity of the community. You cannot sacrifice either or. I think it would be a mistake to, completely follow this progressive part in the church that wants the church unity as soon as possible at any cost, even at the cost of the internal divisions in the church. Or it's equally wrong to follow those conservatives who say, no, we need to stay isolated. We don't need anyone, and let's let's close down and don't talk to each other. That is a general tendency within the global Orthodoxy nowadays. Many churches, like in Bulgaria, in Poland, and other countries, they have this tendency of closing up, of cutting all the ecumenical ties that they had previously. I think this is also wrong. So a balance should be found between the two tendencies, so to say, centrifugal and centripetal tendencies within the church, and only together, only kind of the internal unity within the community and the unity with other communities can be achieved together simultaneously, not separately from each other.
While you were speaking, I just thinking hypothetically, if overnight, it's not possible, but suppose if overnight all the churches will be united in this ecumenical movement, for sure in Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Protestantism will be groups, not small, big groups, will say we must leave the church.
Yeah.
So the result will not be a united church.
Exactly. There will be
we go back. Yes. How do you see the future of ecumenism? Do you believe in a realistic unity of all Christian denomination? If so, under what conditions and how do you see that doctrinal differences may be resolved? But because the real problem are these doctrinal differences.
Well, I don't believe that it is the real problem. We
No?
we saw it in the case of the dialogue between the Byzantine and Oriental Christians, the Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian churches. We decided that we don't have any more doctrinal differences, and we still are not in communion, because what is more important is identity things. People have developed through the centuries. People developed identities that prevent them from joining one another. Like the non-Chalcedonians, they were taught by their moms and dads as children for centuries that the Chalcedon is evil, is like the satanic device, and you should not even think of the Chalcedonian Orthodoxy as something acceptable. It has become a part of their culture, a part of their identity, and it's very difficult to overcome this identity and culture just on the basis of theological arguments. The same is in Orthodoxy. We've been taught that those Armenians and Copts, they are evildoers. They are servants of Satan because they rejected the Council of Chalcedon 1500 years ago, and it has become an identity. There is no any more theology in this. It's just identity, and this even more. Identities are divided when it comes to East and West, to Orthodox and Catholic, to Catholic and Protestant. Even in the Protestant church, well, the Protestant churches are relatively recent. I mean, just 500 years old, but still you have your own identities, which is very difficult to overcome. So I think it's a major challenge for the future of ecumenism, not just to reach a doctrinal agreement, but to overcome the established identities, to deconstruct them. It's really hard because it's about, identity are important in our time. You cannot just get rid of them. It requires a lot of effort and time and pain to deconstruct them. It's something that needs to happen. That's why I don't believe, for example, that we could have a sort of quantum leap towards the church unity. One day we will wake up and the church will be one. It's not going to happen unless Jesus Christ comes on that day, But before that, there will be no quantum leap. There will be a lot of toil and pain and sweat in going closer to each other. I think that the process of rapprochement, the process of coming closer to each other, is as important as the goal, and because it makes us better Christians, and that matters.
But at the root or the spring of this identity is theology, no? I have this identity today because I believe that the Chalcedonian Creed is okay. The other ones, they have this identity today because they believe that non-Chalcedonian ideas are okay.
Yeah, well, the doctrine was important for the identity. In the beginning of those identities, like, for example, Coptic identity goes back to the 5th century, for example. And at that time, the creed shaped the identity. After identity became strong enough, the creed was not needed anymore. Nowadays, if you ask people who say, I hate, those non-Chalcedonian, anti-Chalcedonians, those Copts and, Syrians, and you ask them, what do you believe about Jesus Christ, his two natures? They would not answer you because they don't know theology anymore. The same applies to all groups that still are divided, and they insist on being divided on the basis of identity. If you ask them about theology, they would not know about theology. But what is important for them, the names, the identical things, Chalcedon, non-Chalcedon, popes, non-popes, Protestants, not Protestants, that is what matters. People don't delve into theology behind those identities, and that is the problem. That's why I think theological discussions are still important, because they rediscover theology behind identities, and they may help us to deconstruct identities. But theology as such, only theology, will not help us.
You said that WCC made some mistakes. There was a meeting, if I'm not mistaken, in 1991 at Canberra, when they invited some aborigines groups.
Yeah. There were some strange rituals practiced at the time, and they spooked the Orthodox.
So it is something in regard to what happened there, but not necessarily. The borders of ecumenical movement were set up to include non-Christian religions in Jesus' prayer, that all may be one, or is just something reserved for Christianity? And what happened in Canberra or in other parts is just a mistake.
Well, I think, there is a difference between the ecumenical dialogue and interreligious dialogue. Those are two things, very different things. The purpose of the ecumenical dialogue is to restore eventually Christian unity. The purpose of interreligious dialogue is to make different religious groups living in peace with one another, not to kill one another. Those are very different scopes, different purposes, and different movements. It's not good to confuse them. They can be similar in the methods. The method of dialogue, for example, dialogue is important for both dialogues, interreligious and inter-Christian, but the goals are very different. And I think what happened in Canberra was exactly this confusion between two kinds of dialogue, interreligious and inter-Christian. The WCC is supposed to bring Christian unity, not interreligious unity. And I think the Orthodox churches particularly reacted strongly against the Canberra. And I think the WCC after Canberra modified a lot its approaches and made some corrections.
So they are not repeating this today,
not
the World
anymore.
Council of Churches?
Not anymore. For example, they established a rule that all the rituals, all the prayers had to be decided by mixed commissions with the participation of all participants, all churches, and there could not be eclectic rituals. It can be like, for example, only an Orthodox ritual service, or a Catholic or a Protestant, but not a mixture of them. That's one of the basic principles that emerged after Canberra, for example.
Yeah. When I look over the book that World Council of Churches published after Canberra, there was a book with the report. So it seems to me that those discussions, or at least what is written in that book, is very syncretic, from syncretism. I don't know, it's just my impression, or it was so? You don't know the book?
Well, that was to some extent this idea of syncretism was present in Canberra, and it actually scared many participants. They reacted and they protested, and I think justifiably so in some cases. Well, that's why it's important to separate two sorts of dialogue: interreligious and interchristian. Interreligious dialogue is very important. It's very important to bring peace, to secure peace, to prevent religious wars in our time. But its goal is very different from, again, as I said, from the ecumenical dialogues.
So the borders are drawn to include only Christian religions.
Well, that was the original idea of ecumenism, and I hope it continues to be like that.
Okay. What do you see as impediments to achieve unity, and how soon do you think this will be resolved, if ever?
Well, I don't see in any foreseeable future that any impediment will be resolved. I mean, in any substantial impediment. Well, as I said, doctrine, theology is one of them, but not anymore the most important one. I think the most important impediment is identity of different Christian groups, and even more probably serious impediment, at least in the framework of the institutionalized ecumenism, is politicization of the ecumenical movement. When the churches, when the platforms such as the WCC allow themselves to be instrumentalized by the political authorities, and they align with ideologies. The WCC has aligned with some particular ideologies, like of the left wing tilt, and this ideologization and politicization of ecumenism does not help it. It constitutes really an impediment in achieving unity.
The dictionary of the ecumenical movement uses often the term observer or observer status. But I was looking in the dictionary and there is no entry in the list of definition for observer. What is an observer, church or person, and its involvement in ecumenism? What means observer for a church or a person?
Where it is. For example, if there is a bilateral dialogue, for example, between two particular confessions, two particular traditions, then they may invite some other tradition to send their observers to a dialogue. When, for example, well, the Catholic Church conducts, or the Orthodox Church conducts its councils. Recently, there was a session of the council in Rome where they invited observers from other traditions, like Anglican, Orthodox, or others. And they cannot participate in this event because that event is only for the Catholics, but the Catholic Church wants to demonstrate its ecumenical open-mindedness and invites observers from other traditions, which is great. Sometimes churches hesitate to participate themselves. For example, in the WCC, some churches say, no, it's not for us. It looks like a super church. We don't like it, but we are interested. So we don't want to become like full members, but we want to send our observers to look at what they are doing in order to, for us to decide how to proceed with the ecumenical movement. So it depends very much really on where the observers are sent.
Do you know a church or many churches that are that the ecumenical movement wants them to be inside, but they don't want to be there, and without them, the desires of ecumenical movement can't be achieved?
Well, with or without them, their goals they are still there, but certainly the WCC, for example, speaking about the WCC, even though it's not the only ecumenical platform, but it is the largest one, they try to attract as many churches that suit their criteria as possible. For example, the Church of Georgia, the Orthodox Church of Georgia, it used to be an active participant in the WCC in the Soviet period of time. The Patriarch of Georgia, Elias, he's still alive. He was even one of the presidents of the WCC. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Georgian Church, under the pressure of the conservative groups, withdrew from the WCC. It ceased to be a member of the WCC. And of course, the WCC wants the Church of Georgia to come back to participate in the ecumenical movement. But the fact that the Georgian Church doesn't want to participate does not make the WCC, any different. The WCC can survive without the Georgian Church, but tries nevertheless to bring this church back.
You spoke about WCC as a platform. Which is the most important platform from your point of view?
Well, there are several of them. The WCC is the largest one. I don't believe it is the most important one anymore, but it certainly is the largest one. There are some other, like, for example, the KEC, Conference of European Churches, which is another great platform, and I think it's more functional than even the WCC, probably because it's more like consistent with Europe, and it's more like a common ground for more churches. At least in Europe, and others. For example, the Faith and Order Commission of the WCC, which is a kind of semi-independent body in the WCC, and which brings together theologians. And this is, I think, it's even more functional than the WCC, and so forth. There are different platforms, like the Middle Eastern Council of Churches, and a very important politically unity. It doesn't bring church unity closer very much, but at least it brings more peace to the Middle East, and so forth. Each region has its own ecumenical platform, like the National Council of Churches in the United States, for example, and there are some national, like this one, national councils. I mentioned already the Ukrainian Council of Churches, which is very important. The South African Council of Churches played a leading role in overcoming apartheid. I'm sure, I don't really know, but I'm sure there is such a council in Romania. So it's almost every country and region has such platforms.
And in regard to churches, which church do you think is more involved in ecumenism?
Well, it depends. Well, the Protestant churches are most involved, and also they pay most money as fees to participate in and to support different ecumenical platforms. Probably because some Protestants feel guilty that the division happened because of the Reformation, especially like German Protestants, Lutherans, I don't know, Reformed, or Scandinavian ones. Even though, as I said, divisions were not started by Reformation. Reformation just continued this sad story of divisions in Christianity that go back to the apostolic era. The Catholic Church has become interested in ecumenism since Vatican II, so it was really a turning point for the Catholic Church. Before Vatican II, it was really disinterested, not really interested in ecumenism, and after Vatican II, it became very much interested and continues to be very much interested. And the Orthodox churches, it varies. There were times when the Orthodox churches were very actively participating in the council, in the WCC and the ecumenical movement, like in the 60s, for example. It started in the 1910s and 20s, actually 1920, when the ecumenical movement movement started, and the ecumenical patriarchate was among the protagonists of that movement. Then I said in the 60s, 70s, maybe. Nowadays, we are facing a very much a disappointment among the Orthodox, or disinterest among the Orthodox to participate in the movement. So it depends on the time, it depends on the church, it depends on the region, and it goes up and down in different churches in different times.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Hovorun, for your willingness to speak with me about this topic.